good? You good? You good? You good? Oh no, Lord, it's still there. Okay, okay, no, yeah, good. Hi, hello, welcome. Have I lost it yet? You be the judge of that. The other day my husband, who doesn't actually watch this channel, said like, oh, did you always imagine having a career in vlogging? And I was just like, what? She understands the amount of research that was it, no? Vlogging. Okay, cool. You kind of look lost, but I think we just found you. Has anybody found me though? Because I feel lost. I feel a bit lost. Yeah. Hi, this is gonna be a heavy one. If you are not familiar with this story, just telling you straight up. Disclaimer is needed here. Do you ever see me tweeting at 3 in the morning? It's probably also because of this case, because I remember most vividly some details of it, and I will never ever forget it. So yeah, I kind of wanted to make this case on 7-inch, like sort out the lighting, you know, have a nice camera, can focus, and like actually have done some videos on YouTube, because this case deserves to be done rightfully. I've covered it on the podcast in the early days, so the link is below. The sound was very muffled, like, I mean, it is still as detailed as I'd like it to be. But yeah, the sound isn't the worst in that podcast episode, so hey, here it is. Clear sounds, visuals, let's dive in. This video contains content that might be disturbing to some audiences. We're talking slavery, rape, kidnapping, holding somebody hostage, BDSM. Your discretion is advised. Now, let's go back. Okay. So as you could see from the title, this is the case about the girl in the box. That's the way the media dubbed the case. Her name is Colleen Stan. So this story starts on May 19, 1977. It's based in the US. So let's think about 70s for a second in the US. What do we know about 70s? The prime time for serial killers, prime time for hitchhiking, prime time for cults. Not a great mixture. It's just a weird-ass era to be living in, isn't it? You know, you've been living in the 70s, right? Okay, so anyway. As it's prime time for hitchhiking, Coleen decided on that day to catch a ride from Oregon, where her home is, to North Carolina, where her friend is based, for her birthday party. And she was actually really smart about it, so she wasn't just taking a ride from anybody. There's actually been 2 cars that passed her by. One had like a loud group of boys and they kind of stopped to pick her up, and she was like, nope. And the other one was just like a random dude, and she was like, yeah, no, it doesn't feel safe. So when Cameron Hooker and his wife Janice pulled up to pick her up, they had a little baby in their arms as well. So she was like, okay, it's a couple, they have a baby, this is going to be a safe ride. So she goes into the car. And obviously the 2 of them are in the front seat, so she's in the back seat, and next to her she notices this box, this contraption, but she doesn't actually pay much attention to it. It's just like, oh, it's just, you know, a random box, they're transporting something. On the way to where she thought it's going to be North Carolina, them giving her a ride to her friend's house, she asked to stop at the gas station, and she asked, you know, to go to the toilet. So they do, she does, and in the toilet she kind of describes this in the later interviews as having like a gut feeling. Well, she calls it like a vision from God.
5-10 minutes goes by. They stopped at a gas station, and I got out and went into the bathroom. I don't know if it was God, an angel, whatever, but there was a voice, and it was telling me to jump out the window and run and never look back. And I just kept thinking, this is crazy.
But yeah, you might today say that's kind of a gut feeling. And it kind of told her, like, don't go back into that car, like nothing good will happen if you go back to that car. But she kind of brushes it off. She leaves this toilet and goes back to the car with Cameron and Janice. And they keep driving until now Cameron kind of stops in this remote area and gets out, and she kind of doesn't make fuss out of it, you know, maybe he got out to pee, maybe he got out to do anything. That is until he opens the door to the seat where she is sitting and pulls a knife to her throat, tells her not to scream, not to do anything. And now that box that was sitting next to Coleen comes into play, because he puts it over her head, I'm gonna put pictures of this box because they did a trial. I couldn't understand just by looking at it, because it's kind of grainy footage, etc. Like I couldn't actually understand how this worked, but they have explained the trial. So where you see like the hole, that's where like the head would go. So you're technically just like surrounded by a soundproofing box, and the soundproofing thing you see in there is a carpet. So basically, even if she was to scream, nobody could hear her. And he tells her to lie down so that she's like invisible to the rest of the world. They keep driving, and now they park up in front of Cameron's and Janice's house. And this is the part that I will never understand, but I think it kind of just describes 70s for you and everybody minding their own business. Because how the hell does a woman get out of the car with a whole ass box contraption? You've seen it by now, it's huge. How did she get unnoticed, even if it is just walking from the parkway into the house? That's the part that will never be clear to me. But obviously nothing good happens here. So about her first couple of months, I've read different things from different sources, but both of them are, in a nutshell, very similar. Both of the sources actually confirm the exact same story. They just kind of have different accounts of how she was held in this basement, in this first home for her. Let's not call it home, she was a hostage. In this first place that Coleen was held. As soon as he brought her to the basement, he would tie her up to the ceiling and then would just whip her, torture her immediately and just leave her hanging from the ceiling. So one account states that she would be left hanging there for a while, then the other account says that he still used that box contraption and that she was just like sleeping in the basement by herself just with the box on. What both of those accounts confirm is a torture, be that she would be by herself, isolated with a blindfold on for 23 hours a day. So even when he would torture her and let her use the toilet, eat something for that 1 hour a day, for the first 8 months of captivity, Coleen had a blindfold on. Just for you to visualize how isolating this experience was, just because it will come into play later to explain, well, everything that happened in the story. And there's actually one account in the story that while, during those first few weeks when she was kept in the basement, Janice would, come, like sometimes open the door. Coleen would say like she would hate, as much as it was isolating, she would hate when she would hear the door, because it would be just Cameron coming to torture her for like 1 hour a day. So imagine expecting that every time the door opens. Sometimes it would be Janice, and just like, bringing her food, cleaning up the place after Cameron. It's common for hostage victims to feel erratic, because you're just restless. I mean, you're restless even without being hostage, just, during this quarantine period. Imagine just actually being held, like, not having any control, not having any movements, you're just restless, you just are like screaming, trying to get help, like trying to, like crying, trying to like understand the new situation you found yourself in. So on one of those occasions, Janice actually came to the basement. She asked her like, what's up, or like, what seems to be the problem? I don't know the exact words, but Coleen was just like, what? The first thing that came to her mind was to say that she's cold. She was like, I'm cold. And then Janice actually went back up, came back with a blanket. And Coleen just never even at that point understood that dynamic, understood how Janice could condone Cameron's behavior. But what is the dynamic she's gonna have to have with her as well? So eventually, during those first couple of months, Cameron one day came through and like took the box off her head and took her blindfold off, and she was just like, okay, this is different, what the hell is happening? And she notices next to her another box contraption, but the box contraption looked like a coffin. So it's like human sized, it's like of her size, it literally just looks like a coffin. And she's like, I'm gonna die. Just trying to imagine what goes through your head, like when you see just a guy with like a coffin next to you. But she saw that he is trying to adjust this like a ventilator kind of contraption where her head would be in the coffin. And it's like asking her to like help him out technically with a box. She's like, okay, I don't know if this is better or worse, but yeah, let's help him out. That doesn't mean that he's gonna kill me, because he clearly wants me to breathe in there. After she's put into this box, she's actually now spending her time 23 hours a day in that box underneath their waterbed. Again, yet another 70s thing. Yet another thing that is not explained is really not that relevant in these cases, but I'm like, how is she under a waterbed? Don't waterbeds have, aren't waterbeds on the floor? Anyways, I've watched different series than you, okay? And even though she had that breathing space, that ventilator, whatever, 23 hours in there, and during the summer, in like where they were based, would get sometimes 200 degrees. And she would what, only have like a glass of water once a day. There's a special place in hell, just saying, special place in hell. Okay, now I'm gonna go into some graphic details of the torture very briefly, but I'll put a timestamp on the screen. If you wanna skip that part, that's great. See you later. For the last graphic part of the story. So Cameron would, for that 1 hour a day, torture her, electrocute her, choke her. This doesn't have as much of a timeline. He obviously escalated with her with time. So when he would bath her, like he would either bath with her, which again just gross in itself, or he would submerge her underwater until she was to pass out, and then kind of like pull her back up to like revive her. He would obviously like get off on it, and she said herself that like in those moments she really tried to disassociate, she really tried to like think that she's not there, because that was the only way for her to cope. It's not just in the bath that he would choke her, that was like that was his kink in general, even when he would torture her. But with time, with his like torture room, chamber, whatever you wanna call it, because it was technically just like in a closet, part of the room, he escalated to invented this thing called the stretcher, which does what you probably think it does. It kind of just stretches like all parts of your body until you're in excruciating pain. Which, yet another side note, I don't understand how he did know human anatomy or whatever you want to call it. It's not even anatomy, it's like how far he could push the body, because it's different knowing, you know, being into BDSM and like knowing how far you can push the body when a person might not be having like muscular atrophy, somebody's just lying for 24 hours a day, yet he knew exactly what to do, not to cut her for her to need a doctor, not to like hurt her as much when whipping her, not to leave her like any scars that might get infected, and again, not to, well, let her die with choking, but also with that stretcher, not to like mess up her muscles to the point that he can't actually, that she is not, well, a functioning human being any longer. So I genuinely, that's the part that I have very unexplained about this case, and it would kind of make more sense knowing how the hell did he know what he was doing for all this time. Yeah, I will not touch upon the torture bit any longer, so welcome back if you left. Okay, cool. Scarred for life. Roughly, we kind of know that this happened about 8 months ago, when he took Colleen's blindfold once again. He puts a piece of paper in front of her, and it's a contract. It's a slave contract. So during this time, while you know they were keeping her, while Janice and Cameron were keeping her locked up in a box for 23 hours a day, the two of them were working downstairs. It's actually said that Janice might have been the person who was like on the typewriter typing this contract up, and not just typing the contract up, but typing up like newspaper articles that they even like cut out so they look like they're from real newspapers, saying that girls have been enslaved all over the US and that their conditions might improve if they sign this contract. But yes, that they are at the mercy of their masters, that they can do with them whatever they want. And she just looks at this and looks at these articles, and Coleen just signs the contract. And in the contract, so one of the clauses in the contract, it is to call him master and for him to choose the name for her. And he chooses the name K. It's from like this fictional book where again somebody is just dehumanized and it's just called like a letter, so it's like called K. I think in the book the person is called O. Didn't really look into it. This story is bizarre enough with itself. Signing this contract would give her privileges, basic human rights, but they called it privileges. So she would be able to like go upstairs, help out with chores, sometimes technically work as if she was their maid, sometimes babysit the kids, because by this point Cameron and Janice had 2 kids. She would still have to do anything that he said, so if he wanted to keep her in the box again for 23 hours a day, he could. If he wanted to just like stop her to like whip her or take advantage of her, he would. And she had to respect Janice equally as well, so she was like the madam for her, so she had to respect her as well. Cameron introduced this entity that was called the company. So of course it's the company that is enslaving all these people, and it's company that's kind of in charge of him. But throughout this whole period of brainwashing Coleen, he is going to try to appear as like he's such a great master, you know, he's allowing all of these things and treating her so much better than all of the other masters are treating their slaves. Like, even he might get in trouble if the company finds out. But the company has to own like her family's address, the addresses of all of her like friends and family basically. If she ever tries to escape, they will hurt her family. So of course, having that in the back of her head, she was, even when doing these chores, like between 1980 and 1984, she would actually leave the house quite a few times. Like, she would go jogging, and she said every single person that was saying hi to her on the street, she would get paranoid there from the company that they know what she's doing, so she would just like try to ignore every contact with the outside world because she feared that her family will be harmed. And at this point, because now she's kind of developing somewhat of a relationship with Janice, his wife, both of them realize that they are quite Christian and they both read Bible. That's what appeases both of them. So sometimes Janice and Coleen would read the Bible together, or Coleen would, from her box, listen to Janice read the Bible in bed. A couple of words on Janice. Obviously she was quite compliant with whatever Cameron was doing, and I know there's going to be divided comments below whether Janice was a victim or whether she was just fully compliant, and maybe even worse than Cameron, just for allowing this to happen for 7 years. But Janice played like a huge role in this brainwashing thing, especially when the contract came to power, because she has said to Coleen that Cameron actually saved her as well. So she has been enslaved, but like he has actually saved her by marrying her. So, oh my god, like look at how great we have it. Like, I'm married now, I have kids. It's like you will have a better treatment if you sign this contract.
The amount of time Cameron spends with Colleen does not go unnoticed by Janice.
She was aware of everything all along. The only thing she didn't know about was the rapes that were occurring. But she knew about everything else that was going on. She was fully aware of it.
She felt some sense of relief because he was practicing the heavier bondage on Colleen, but she had other feelings as well.
She didn't like me, and she didn't like me being there.
At this point also, Cameron felt fully confident that he had complete power over Coleen. Obviously because, yeah, well, she was going out and everything. To the point that he actually, for her birthday, I think it was her birthday in 1980, that he let her have a phone call with her sister. And for Coleen, well, this was everything. So I think they went to like a phone box, and he was just literally there looking at the Bizarrian, so she doesn't give her any signs. So it was just like a quick call for her to check in, say hi and say that she's well. And for her family that was looking for her all this time, this was kind of like, okay, cool, at least we know she's well. Because her family obviously by this point thought that she has joined a cult, just because it was such a thing in the 70s and 80s. To test Colleen's trust, in 1981, Cameron actually drove her down to Oregon for her to spend the weekend with her family. To allow Coleen to go visit her parents, he asks her to kneel down, then put the gun into her mouth and pull the trigger, just to prove again, just to get off again on the thought that he has all the power over her and that she's gonna do everything he asks. And she was super excited, but obviously she knew that if she was to give them any signs, if she was to say anything, that the company will know and that the company is just going to harm both her and the family. So he leaves her to go visit the family. She goes into the house, you know, spends like such nice time. Her family missed her. They were taking pictures with her immediately and of her. And they were just like, you know, trying to ask her any questions, but she was really timid, she was really shy. They still spent like a great night together. But the next day, Cameron got paranoid, so he went back to pick her up. He didn't even let her have the whole weekend. But this time he actually comes to the door and he meets the whole family. And there's this picture of the two of them that looks like they're a couple because, well, he said like, oh, he's her fiance. You know, they're just spending their time together. They're just planning their lives together or whatever. He just invented some bullshit story for her family. And this picture will become important later in the story just because it kind of looks to people that it's just a happy couple. Right? There's nothing wrong there. Like, Why would she be putting her arms around him? Why would she be looking like all happy in the picture if she was trying to scream for help? And at this point, it's been 4 years of brainwashing, so just try to like understand that situation from that point of view. After he picks her up from Oregon, from her visiting her parents, he has now been spooked. And he again keeps Coleen without any privileges or just basic human rights in the box for 23 hours a day for almost another 3 years, until 1983. This is also the period when the torture escalated, as I mentioned, during that time, like he introduced a whole other contraption. Yeah, if you listen to that. But in 1983, he again lets her have some basic freedoms. This is also when I've read in some sources that Coleen would go out with Janice while Janice was having affairs, and she would kind of just stand there and hold guard. And then they would come home, and it was kind of all in an attempt of Janice to actually, get Cameron to be jealous of her. Cameron to be jealous, to be like, oh my god, like you're having affairs, like what's wrong with our marriage? But Cameron just never actually cared. And this kind of just goes to explain the dynamic between Coleen and Janice, because Janice considered Coleen her one and only friend at this point, which is, yes, super sad. B just tells you a lot about their mental state of mind. In 1983 now, when she has some basic freedoms, Coleen actually takes up the courage to go up to Cameron and ask him to get a job. And surprisingly, Cameron is okay with that, because by this point he just trusts her completely. So Coleen actually is just going around with him with like her CV that she has again done in the house, and she's just applying to jobs, and she gets one as this receptionist at a motel. However, by this point, between 83 and 84, the dynamics in the Hooker household have kind of shifted, because for Cameron, it wasn't just enough what he was doing now. He has actually come up to Janice and told her that he wants to make Coleen his second wife. And you might remember that, yes, Janice did sell this bullshit story to Coleen, how like he has married her to save her from slavery. Obviously, it's an incorrect story. But she actually never wanted him to have a second wife. Like, in fact, she was going along with all of this just so she could keep her marriage, just so she could keep Cameron interested, just so he wouldn't actually torture her, but he would have like this other slave, and then he would be a nice and gentle, normal husband with her. So for her, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. So during this crucial year, she goes to church and she kind of tries to speak to the pastors, to speak to people. Janice, she tries to go and like speak up, and she obviously can't reveal everything, but she's kind of saying it in such words that pastors think that the husband is cheating on her, and they're kind of being like, well, you should always stay with your husband, all that nonsense, like divorce is a no-no. Divorce is a no-no, just please stay with your freaking husband at all costs. So she's kind of just bummed out and just, like, I can't get any help, like, my slave is my only friend. Who else do I ask for advice? What a bummer you put yourself in, Janice. And finally, on one such occasion, she kind of does explain that, hey, her husband does want to have a second wife, and the Pope is like, yep, that's not acceptable, monogamy is the way forward. And Janice is there like, finally, somebody gave me an excuse. So she goes to the motel, pulls Coleen into her break and just tells her the company has been a lie this whole time. Coleen is like, what? 7 years? 7 fucking years? So she's obviously pissed, but she kind of feels for Janice at this point, because, well, they have befriended each other in this weird ass situation for 7 years. So when Janice asks her to go home for one other night, just to pretend like everything is normal, she does. So she goes into her box, spends one last night at the Hooker household, and then the next morning she calls her dad to wire her some money for a bus ticket home, and her dad was super happy for this. So of course he does that. She actually finally returns to Oregon, but not before she gives a call to Cameron. She tells him like, I know everything, I know you've been lying and I'm leaving you, and Cameron just cried like a baby because he finally realized like he doesn't have any power over her or anybody. And yeah, that's been his king for about 7 years, so yeah, he lost. It's actually for months that once Coleen returns home, she keeps in touch with Janice. They literally like speak on the phone almost every day, like friends. And Janice is kind of telling her, yep, Cameron is now escalating, he is actually taking it all out on me. Guess what? Because he doesn't have another person. And Coleen kind of also encourages her to like maybe go to law enforcement, but it's also when Janice speaks with the pastor again and she actually tells him what's happening that he's like, yeah, you need to actually go to law enforcement. So Cameron is arrested in 1984, finally, like a year after. Almost a year after, like, Coleen actually escaped. This is when the police contacts Coleen and they just didn't believe the story to begin with. But then, when they went to Cameron's home and they found the whole chamber, they found a box, they found the other contraption, the other square box, and they obviously found a ton of pervy Playboy magazines and like probably even worse than, a lot worse than Playboy, and just BDSM material. Everything that he has been just piling up on for years in his basement. So we go to trial. Janice obviously got immunity to testify against Cameron. Well, the prosecution said that like she has been brainwashed for years again. So this is why she couldn't defy her husband. During this trial, Coleen testified. Defense this whole time was trying to be like, well, yeah, he kidnapped her, yeah, cool, that was bad on him. But then, you know, she was all consensual, like everything was all consensual after some point. Look at this. And people were like, no, there's a slave contract, motherfuckers. Also, the second point was, like, after a couple of years, Coleen wrote, like, a love letter to Cameron. And I think this was her doing it, a survival strategy, because she knew if she was to be nice to him, then, you know, he might be nicer to her. He might lay off the torture for days. He might not submerge underwater for days. This matters to a lot of people, so Cameron didn't show any remorse, you know, obviously he was trying to defend himself. Plead not guilty because again he's like, yeah, it was consensual, you know. Yeah, I kind of hate when people are like, oh, they show no remorse. I'd rather them not show not remorse for me to see them as a piece of shit that they are than people that are faking remorse. They're just crying and they're like making this whole scene in court. I'm like, well, this is worse. For me that's worse, because that means like not just you showing remorse, it's just you taking a piss out of it. During the trial, Cameron actually, when he took the stand, he tried to say that the brutalities were actually a lot less than the women have said. It's like, oh, they're just women, you know, how they exaggerate. This guy, the judge hated him. The judge actually hated him because his defense, he brought like a psychiatrist to say, who, like, I know the defense attorneys are just doing their job, but where did you find these people to actually defend this, by this defense? So this psychiatrist has said that what Cameron has put these two women through is not much different than what Marines put their trainees through. And the judge was like, yeah, that's enough for that argument. Jury disregard. Let's continue with this. Get the fuck off the stand. Like, what is this argument? The jury took 3 days to deliberate, which I'm like, what were you doing there for 3 days? This is a clear-cut fucking case. Why were you tied? What is this? There's like cases that have been deliberated for like 30 minutes. Why is this not one of them? It clearly should be. Well, okay, not saying anything against the jury. The jury has actually seen both the coffin and the box, and they actually could go even to like spend some time in the coffin just to put themselves in that situation. So that jury needed therapy as much as Coleen and Janice did after this trial as well. So they found him guilty on 7 out of 8 counts, including rape and kidnapping. And he got 104 years in prison. Love how it's like, no, 100 is not enough, let's add a couple more, just if he appears to like be the longest living human. And the judge actually closed off by making a statement. He thanked the jury for disregarding the psychiatrist's claim. Remember the Marines one? And he said that Cameron is the most dangerous psychopath he ever dealt with, and that he will be a danger to women as long as he's alive. So he's been in prison since 1985. In 2015 he applied for parole, was luckily obviously denied. But I just hate paroles in these cases because there are some cases that shouldn't actually even have a parole. Like if it's a clear cut, if you can most definitely say somebody's in prison for all the right reasons, there's no miscarriage of justice, why put the family for all of this? Like, Coleen has given the most recent interview, I think in 2016. I'll link down the documentary where you can watch it all. And she's just like, yep, here I go again, 2015, reliving it all. And I agree, why put people through it? Now his next parole is in 2030, so again, that's what, in just 10 more years. And what I don't know about this case is what happened with the children. Like, have the children ever been taken from Janice? Has she gotten therapy and has gotten the custody of the children? Like, that's one thing where I'm like, those children must have changed their names. I mean, I kind of actually hope that those kids have gotten therapy, just because obviously seeing in the news that your nanny hasn't actually been your nanny, but your dad and mom kept her as a slave, might change your opinion of your parents. Speaking of the parents, let's go on to the life story of Janice and Cameron, and into the background to hopefully help us understand where this fascination with slavery, with BDSM even came from. Well, Cameron apparently had like a pretty normal childhood. Everybody that was interviewed after this described him as like a happy kid, nothing seemingly out of the ordinary with his family. Well, somebody actually said that he has had a fascination with bondage since he was 5-6 years old, which would kind of explain why he knew what he was doing if he has actually developing it since he was 5. And he met Janice when he was 19 and Janice was 15. And this is where he actually got to experience the bondage, where he was actually super fascinated and he finally had his patsy, he finally had a submissive. And why Janice was a perfect submissive for Cameron is because she was the youngest out of a family of 4, and her whole family vibe, the only thing that we know is that they have her sisters and, well, just her parents were kind of just raising her, making her think that she's unworthy of love. She's like the youngest one, you know, the whole family was just focusing on the older siblings. So when she found Cameron, she was 15, so she was also still easily impressionable. But she just latched onto him because finally there's somebody telling her she is worthy of love. There's somebody actually giving her attention. So of course she's going to latch onto him and just do anything he asks, because she just desperately wanted to be loved at that point. So I've seen different accounts of this next event, but it's kind of important and kind of defining moment in their relationship. One account says this was their first date. The other one says like it was kind of down the line. So Cameron brought Janice to like the middle of nowhere and tied her to a tree, then stripped her naked and just whipped her. She actually said that when that happened, she was like, yep, as soon as I get out of this, I'm out of this relationship, like this is not normal. But then it's how Cameron acted afterwards that convinced her to stay. So he was all nice, super sweet, like extra sweet, exactly what she wanted him to be. And she was like, well, I stayed. Now they get married in 75, and if you remember, this is only 2 years before they kidnapped Coleen. So within those 2 years, Cameron was just as brutal as he was with Coleen. So everything, like including torture, including choking, including submersion into water. There was a couple of breaking points for Janice. I think one of them was when he got home and he asked Janice to wear a gas mask. It's like the Chernobyl kind of thing. Yeah. So, and she just refused, and he tortured her, and she just like said like basically, I can't handle this any longer. She tried to limit torture to like 1 session a week, but then that wasn't enough for him and he just wanted to get away with anything. So they had this beautiful, again, dinner conversation. I imagined this dinner conversation. I try to like visualize these things. I just don't understand how the two of them, how the dynamic ever worked. Because like what, he works, she's at home, he works, he comes home, then it's like, oh, how was your day, honey? And they just completely ignore the fact that they have a slave like in their home. What is what is association levels are we speaking of here? So on one such, in my head, dinner occasions, the two of them sat down and Janice was like, listen, I kind of need this torture to stop because I want to have your child. Children resolve everything, right? They're gonna resolve all of our problems. And Cameron was like, okay, let's make a deal, right? You can have your child, but I'm gonna get a sex slave and then I can take it out on somebody else and that will solve all our problems. And Jules was like, great. So I'm like, handshake, handshake. I also imagine this as like she's preparing a cradle for a child. She's preparing like, oh, baby clothes. Hey honey, what have I bought today? Look at this, how cute it is, this baby item. And he's like, oh, you want to see what I have been working on? It's a torture chamber. What is the dynamic? Like, all of this could have been prevented, man. Don't fall for torture chamber, people. Don't stay with people when you're 15. Okay, just kidding. There's lovebirds, there's sweethearts relationship. You keep your relationship going. In terms of Colleen, she actually didn't have, like, she actually had quite a rough childhood. She was abused by her mom's boyfriend, then got addicted to drugs, then got clean and got pregnant when she was 16. She got married, then she got pregnant, and she terminated her unwanted pregnancy when she was only 16. So when she went to visit her friend, and like when she took the ride from Cameron and Janice, she was actually kind of like on the lookout of like her life looking up finally. She finally got back on her feet and she just wanted to, you know, move on with her life, leave that in the past. And then she just lost 7 years of her fucking life due to this couple. Due to one man's sadistic intentions and another woman's submission. Colleen actually took this experience and again turned it into something positive. It's just, there's a lot better people than me. I realize when I do these videos, there's a lot worse people. There's a lot better people because she was so forgiven. She has forgiven Janice and Cameron for what they have done. She has moved on with her life. She moved on to get the accounting degree. She got married. She has children and grandchildren. And it's just, her outlook is so positive. The way she just described this whole event is so like calming. It's like, yep, this has happened and I have moved on. They are not part in my life. They don't know me, and I have forgiven them. I have just continued flourishing, continued growing, and providing help to other women who have been abused, providing help to the victims of abuse. And I'm just like, damn. It's like, how do you turn something so bad into something so good? So yeah, that's the case of Colleen Stan, the girl in the box. I'm just briefly gonna, because I always think about like, why the hell has he done it? Why the hell was Janice there submissive forever? So I'm just gonna briefly kind of discuss like what I think the motives were in this case. Yeah, so if you want to stay for that, stay. If not, see you next time. See you next time. Quite like with cases of Gary hiding that I covered here, toy box killer that I covered on the podcast. Cameron was a sadist who finally found a woman that he was like, yep, this is gonna be my compliant partner, where, you know, I can torture her, have complete power over her. But then eventually that's not enough because he's not seeking help. This sadistic nature just escalates, and then he moves on. He's like, yep, I need another person now. I need to have complete control over 2 women. And then, as we know, that's not enough, so like that kind of escalates. So he would have wanted Colleen to be his wife, as we know, and would have probably wanted for him to have his children, and he just explains this to himself, like in his head, and then everything is justified. He has complete power over 2 women. So with him, I'm pretty sure he was like actually diagnosed and he was a sadist as well, just because of everything that he has enjoyed doing and has, well, mastered throughout the years, and the power that he was inflicting over these women. The one that troubles me is Janice, and like I would like to know in your comments what you think about her. But I always think about the power couples, right? The deadly duos, whatever you want to call them, Fred and Rose West. Well, toy box killer and his woman, I forgot her name, but that didn't last that long. They didn't last that long, and she was equally evil. Like Myra Hindley, what's that? Yeah, that couple as well, the British couple. I'm trying to think like Americans, suddenly I can't remember American couples. Okay, cool. Well, Bonnie and Clyde, but you get me. They weren't like, they just were getting off on money and robbing and killing. They weren't as sadistic. And I just always think like, did the women get off way too easily just because they were females? They could play that like, well, I'm a female, what did I know, you know, I was submissive this whole time. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, Janice definitely was a victim in this case as much as Colleen was, like probably even more, because she had it for even longer periods of time. But then I've always found it interesting what makes those women break, and it's always something trivial. It's like, yeah, you could have lived with yourself, with her getting all the torture and all of the things that you have endured, and you know how much you hated it. But then now suddenly he's like, I'm gonna marry her, and she's like, no, say no more, I'm gonna stop this right now to the roots. Let me know down below what you think, but like, I don't find these women as innocent for them to just go scot-free. nothing, no punishment whatsoever, while they were compliant. They knew what was happening for 7 fucking years. Also, like, I can't stop thinking about the children. I really hope at least she has gotten some therapy. She knew what the normal situation for to bring children in is before she was given those children back. I could just hope that, obviously for privacy reasons, I couldn't find any details of them, because obviously they didn't share anything, and those kids probably don't want to know that they were those kids. So yeah. Well, this was a depressing ass case, and I always do them in the mornings and then get bummed out for the rest of my fucking days. This case is what haunts me at night. If you ever see me online, and like, you know, if you ever see me online 3, 4 in the morning, this is it. This is it. I'm in the motherfucking box. This is it. Because this is one of those cases that will stay with me forever and ever. Because people need to pee and poop more than once a day, okay? They need human conditions, not to be called privileges. Yep, cool. Well, I'm off topic. Okay, so let me know down in the comments what you guys would like me to do. I'll probably at least try to, you know, once every 2 weeks do something that's not true crime, so that, you know, I can live and breathe and not think about this at like 3 in the morning. But yeah, let me know what you think about this case, what your theories were on the motivation and just in general, if I missed out on something. What do you think about Janice? That's the one thing that I really want to know. Like, how much do you think like she was actually responsible for a lot of this? But yeah, apart from that, I have nothing else to tell you and nothing else to say. So this is a goodbye. Bye.